Okay, attention everyone. This is gonna be the very last presentation we're gonna have today. So fresh up, and I'll quickly finish this. And what I'm going to talk about is the text analysis of 2014 press conference, or what I'm studying is actually called the language of diplomats. And here's a brief outline. First, I'm going to talk about the aims and objectives of my study, and second, I'll talk about my text, and thirdly, the methodology, and fourthly, text analysis, and finally, the summary. First, about my aims. Why I want to study this is to explore appraisal, speech function, and generic structure in the transcript of the press conference of Li Keqiang, Premier of China. And second is to better appreciate the polite and the delicate language of diplomats. Simple. And about the text. Here, the text type is reporting text, and its subtype is interview media, and its mode is spoken and dialogue. So in total, it has 6,222 words, and I picked out 3,042 words because there are totally 15 issues, and I singled eight out of them. And in terms of the clauses, altogether it has 709 clauses, which is actually an estimated number. And the parts I singled out contains the clauses of 308. And as for the press conference of the Premier, in case you don't know, I'd like to make a brief introduction of it. First, it's a media event following the NPC and CPPCC, the two sessions of the Chinese Communist Party. Or you all know the Chinese name is Liang Hui. And its major participants is Chinese and foreign press, and also the Premier of China. And they will meet and then pose questions and answer the questions. And the third thing about it is it has a long tradition since Zhou Enlai was ever elected Premier, which is actually since the foundation of People's Republic of China. And normally it would follow such a process. First, some opening remarks from the moderator, and then the Premier. And then it's the Q&A session. So Q&A, endless Q&A. And then finally some opening remarks, and everyone goes to have lunch. And here I'd like to make a comparison between the newest three premiers. They're Zhu Rongji, Wen Jiabao, and Li Keqiang. And these three, they have very different personal styles. As for Zhu Rongji, this guy really wants to go impromptu, because he doesn't want all the questions to be prepared beforehand. And as for Wen Jiabao, we all know that he speaks very slowly, and and also he's fond of quoting the ancient sayings, etc. And as for Li Keqiang, later I'll talk about more. And as for the duration, since there's a lot of complicated issues for him to answer, so the length is quite long actually. Normally it would last for 145 minutes. And for Wen Jiabao, because he speaks really slow, so normally it would be 183 minutes. And for Li Keqiang, because this year is the first time for him to meet the press, so there's only one figure, and it's 107 minutes. And here's a profile of our Premier Li Keqiang. So before he was elected, he served as the vice premier under Premier Wen Jiabao. And then in 2013, March 15th, he was elected by the 12th National People's Congress, the NPC, as premier. And as for his performance during this year's press conference, according to the national media, he is confident, wise, and practical. He is telling the truth. But what about BBC's view? towards his performance. You can see BBC says he fails to surprise at the media event. And they already can tell that all the answers are carefully scripted, so nothing new. They're very cautious. And let's take a glimpse of how this goes. This is the spokesperson of the NPC session, or the moderator. We're happy to invite Premier Li Keqiang to meet the press. Then some opening remarks from Li Keqiang.
Good morning.
Then this is the first question concerning the missing airplane. This is the interpreter translating the journalist's words.
马航飞机失联已经有6天的时间了，大家都在急切的等待。
检查，还有一艘正在。
Then that's him answering the question. So then after this is Q&A session again.
而且我们还动用了10颗卫星进行。
Okay, that's it. Then concerning the methodology I use, first is appraisal, and second is speech function, and thirdly is generic structure potential, GSP. As for appraisal, in case you don't know it, I decide to briefly introduce it to you. So appraisal is concerned with evaluation and the kinds of attitudes that are negotiated in the text and the ways in which values are sourced and readers aligned, according to Martin Rhodes, 2007. So why do I think appraisal is useful towards the text I studied? Because first, the attitudinal evaluations in the text reveal the speaker's feelings and values. And second, their expression can be related to the speaker's or the writer's status or authority as construed by the text. And thirdly, how the speaker overtly encodes what he presents as his own attitudes. Actually, for Li Keqiang, he seldom stand on the stance of himself, but actually more on the government side. And fourth, how he indirectly activates evaluative stances and position listeners to supply his own assessments. And the category I study in particular is modality. And modality system expresses the speaker's attitudes and judgments, and also reflects the speaker's assessment of validity of the proposition. So according to Halliday, modality refers to the area of meaning that lies between yes and no, and the intermediate ground between positive and negative polarity. So here's a brief review of modality system. Under it has major two categories: it's propositions and proposals. And under propositions, there's probability and usuality. Or typically, the typical words we can see are possibly, or probably, or certainly. And for usuality, it's sometimes, or usually, or always. And under the proposals, there are obligation and inclination. And typical words are allowed to, supposed to, be required to for obligation, and for inclination, it's be willing to, be anxious to, or be determined to. And as for speech function, the speech functional model is based on a negotiatory model. And I've searched something on the internet, and I found this article, and on it says an exchange is the unit in which some proposition or proposition complex is negotiated between the participants. So that's actually an exchange of information. And as for the speech function categories, here there are mainly two parts. One is initiation, Or in the text I studied, the one standing on this part is the press. And then response. There are expected response and also unexpected response. And in the text, it's the Premier Li Keqiang. And in the initiation, there are different parts. For instance, like statement or offer or question or command or greeting. These are all involved in the text I studied. And especially since this is an interview, so I will mainly focus on this part, which is question part. And then under this category, it will be answer and disclaimer. And as for unexpected response, here in the text I studied, there will only be no response, and I will explain later. And for generic structure potential, GSP, it's a model of the structure of text which recognizes functional units of various kinds and links the configuration of these units to register or as defined by field, tenor, and mode. And according to Haysan, who invented this model, GSP is an abstract category, and it is descriptive of the total range of textual structures available within a genre. And the GSP represents the total potential of structural resources for a genre. And here, we know when we want to study a text because it's special. So why it is special? Because we need to focus on these two parts, but which elements can occur in a GSP, in a particular text, and in what configuration. So what elements can decide these two elements? That would be the field, tenor, and mode. Field is the subject matter or topic, and tenor is the roles of the participants, and mode is the channel of communication. So Haysan named these three elements as contextual configuration, or CC. And she says a generic structure is constituted of the obligatory elements, the optional elements, and their recursive elements, and their sequence. Okay, now get back to the text. So I think because I singled 8 issues out of 15, so there are also 8 press. And you can see that each questions they posed. CNN posed the most one as he asked 5 questions. Very eloquent speaker. And of the clause numbers, he asked 5 questions. So there are 13 clauses. And in the answer, Li Keqiang made 32 clauses. And to others, like People's Daily, the mouthpiece of Communist Party of China, and the journalist only used 5 clauses to pose 2 questions, and also Li Keqiang replied with 32 clauses. And I don't want to shed more on this. I just want to point out that you can see normally he would use like 30 or 20 or 40 or more to answer the question. But I don't know why. Maybe it's just a coincidence. On the issue of Taiwan and Hong Kong, he talked actually a little, very little. I don't know why, but this might be some interdisciplinary course I need to study on other different courses. Okay, and as for the appraisal showed up in the press speech, you can see the appraisal. Normally what they would modify would shine light on the question and the issue. They would modify the issue and the question. Yes, that's what I want to say. In the description of the issue and in the question asking, but except for the masterpiece of CPC is People's Daily, ETTV of Taiwan, Xinhua News Agency, and China National Radio. Those 4 in the red circles. As you can see, while others on this category, they're 0. But for these 4 categories, They are 2211. For instance, like People's Daily, concerning the issue of anti-corruption campaign. So the journalist asked, there is a widely shared concern in the society as to whether this recent anti-corruption campaign will be a short-lived one. And last year, many corrupt officials were dealt with. But does this show there exist some institutional flaws in China? And what new steps will the government take to combat corruption? And here, just take one sentence for example. Last year, many corrupt officials were dealt with. Here, corrupt officials is evaluated. And I think the reason why they would shed light on modifying this part concerning the government part is because they are the government's mouthpiece. So they want to speak in favor of the government. So actually, posing the question, through the study of the appraisal here, I can know that he was actually speaking in favor of the government. And that shows he's exactly the mouthpiece of the Communist Party of China. And as for Li's speech, you can see mostly he would modify things of the government, like the attitudes of the government, the actions, or the resolutions. And he seldom speak on behalf of himself. There are only like 1 for the first one, or 0 for, there are even 0 number for the 2 issues concerning anti-corruption and Sino-US relations. So as for the government, normally what he would modify or why there is appraisal is because he wants to speak in favor of the government as he speaks on behalf of the government. For instance, like also in the anti-corruption campaign issue, he said, corruption is the natural enemy of the people's government, and we must apply the rule of law in both thinking and action in fighting corruption. Here, he just showed the government's attitude towards corruption and also their resolution and what they're going to take, what actions they are going to take. Like we must apply the rule of law, blah, blah, things like that. And as you can tell from this table, what normally would be modified is the things on others. So what does others contain? That's merely the state of facts or some other objective objects. Like here, in answering the issue of China's economic growth, he said, in this course, a growing number of Chinese people will make overseas trips. So here, the Chinese people is evaluated, and the evaluating item is a growing number of. And here, what I want to say is that because during his speech, during his answering to the questions, he would normally use some sensational phrases or speakings to interact with the audience, to align with the audience, so as to convince them to stand in his stance. So this is the major part also, except for government that he wouldn't bother to shed more light on. And as for the speech function in text, here you can see there are normally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 categories of the speech function that's involved in the text, like greeting and offering a statement, question, answer, command, contradiction, follow-up, and no response. Since other items are quite ordinary, so here I'd like to only to pick up no response and explain why there is no response. Here you can see, in total, the question posed by the press is 14. However, the answer of Li is only 12. So there are 2 no response. And I'm going to explain. Like here, the People's Daily posed 2 questions here. First, it's a brief statement of the status quo of the issue. And then he asked 2 questions. First is, does this show there exist some institutional flaws in China? And the second is, what new steps will the government take to combat corruption? And let's take a look at what he said. Primarily, first, he talked about the government's attitude towards anti-corruption campaign. He said, the Communist Party of China and the Chinese government have a firm will and resolve to fight corruption. This is our consistent position, so only the government's attitude. Then he keeps on talking the government's actions. The CPC Central Committee has been steadfast in combating corruption and holding corrupt officials accountable what they are doing. And then finally, he talked about the answer of the question number 2, actually. He said, new progress has been made and we will carry forward this campaign with perseverance. So question 2, what new steps will the government take? And then after that, he went back to talk about something else. That's government's resolution. For corrupt behaviors and corrupt officials, we will show zero tolerance. Then this, again, something else. And then after this, we went back again to answer the question number 2. We are going to release to the public a list of powers as quickly as possible and set down a clear boundary for the exercise of power to prevent power abuse. So that's also something new that the government will take. And then after that, he went back to talk about something else. Again, the government's resolution. We will take institutional steps to ensure that rent-seeking behaviors and corruption have nowhere to hide. That's all emotional or sensational phrases or sentences. Then it's done. So, as for question number 1, does this show there exists some institutional flaws of China? No response. Okay. As for the generic structure of the press speech, here we can see there's a major pattern for this. The phrases are like first statement, and then question, and then greeting. Statement normally would be self-identification, like I'm with Xinhua News Agency, like stating who I am. And then the status quo of the issue, like the GDP, this year's GDP is 7.5, and the people are worrying about that. How do you see this? The question, how do you see this? Like, what's the government's attitude towards this? Or what actions are you going to take? That's asking for the government's response. And then greeting to the premier, just simple, like thank you. Or use Heisan's system, I'd like to put it in this way. It's question, statement, question, greeting. And as you can see, I don't want to talk about more about it. Then, the generic structure of the premier's speech. There are also 3 phases. First, related talk, or I would like to coin a phrase as playing Tai Chi. Skillfully avoid the answering the question and just to talk about something else, which is related but not relevant. Previously, I coined this phrase and seems some are quite confused about it. And I just want to give you a brief example, which is like if you ask me, do you like bananas? And I would answer, well, banana is great. Banana, it has a charming color of yellow, and it can also shine your shoes. But altogether, I didn't answer you whether I like banana or not. So that's playing Tai Chi and avoiding the type. And then comes to the answer session, like directly answer to the question, and then he would talk about something else normally. For the diplomats, they would talk about like the government's attitude and then the response, and then follow up information. But that would all be something in favor of the institution or the government itself. Like the attitude, response, or resolution, they just talk big and then get you so sucked, and then you will lose yourself and think, yes, this man speaks really great. and also, and put it in this order: Tai Chi and answer, and Tai Chi and follow up. And those in the brackets is optional elements. Sometimes they would speak things in terms of this, sometimes they wouldn't. So that's all depends on the time or on the issue, how hard it will be hard to answer. Okay, so before the summary, I want to say that the rule or the process for the press to pose the question and for the premier to answer is actually, I heard about that before. That's once I have a teacher that's teaching me interpreting, and she said normally they would follow this suit, and anytime you would interpret, then you need to keep this process in mind so as to project what will happen. But I'm really proud of it because this is what I've done through my own research. Okay, anyway, summary. As for the language of diplomats, so I can learn that through appraisal, I can know the stance, the attitude, and the actions one may take concerning an event. So even though the diplomat may talk big in front of me, I can learn how the things really are through appraisal. And as for speech function, to complete one unit or units of exchange of information. Sometimes, yes, seems the diplomats really answered the question, but if you use our linguistic tools, you will find out actually because he didn't directly answer the question, so we cannot say this unit of exchange of information is ended, is complete, so we cannot say that. So you can know how you can judge whether or not did a diplomat answer the question well. And as for generic structure potential, you can learn the rule of the press to pose questions and the premier or speak to answer. So in the future, maybe you may work for the government or serve as a public servant. Then you can learn how to skillfully play Tai Chi and avoid hard questions. Okay, that's all. Thank you.